Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest version of Tales from Outer Space, where I take an HFY story from somewhere around the internet and read it aloud for your enjoyment. All the relevant links are down below. Like, subscribe, and all that YouTube gumph to help this video and channel grow. Anyways, as always, I hope that you enjoy. I would just like to thank the following Tier 5 patrons and channel members for supporting the channel: Datamagnet and Bob the Dragon. Thank you again. And now, on to the story. Priceless, written by DracheGraethe. I'm sorry, he repeated, but the numbers are clear. Average time to recover a single individual in this quadrant, plus individual costs. It's simply not within accepted range. The representative reached out an arm and gripped her shoulder in what was obviously meant to be a comforting gesture. It did not work. The Pauli he was addressing, a brood keeper of substantial size and even more substantial volume, returned to her wailing as soon as her words were translated. The rest of the crew averted their eyes uncomfortably, though whether the respect of her mourning or out of general discomfort was not clear. The brood keeper had lost one of her charges below, when the team had allowed the younglings out into the habitable surface for a rare treat. Real, natural air. The problem was, it had taken next to no time for the youngling to disappear, according to his remaining companion, who had been so embarrassed at losing his friend that he hadn't reported him missing to the broodkeeper until several hours later, and even then only once she attempted to check them back onto the ship. Now, Representative Thex had the unenviable task of informing her that the ship's onboard calculation placed the cost and risks of recovery at unacceptable levels. Simply put, it was neither financially viable nor worth the risk involved to send the ship's complement of Senate soldiers out to the surface. The ship had run some sort of strange, nearly incomprehensible calculation based on available data and found that the odds of recovery were low. The total man-hours required would be financially problematic, and the brood creeper's status on the vessel was insufficient to justify the cost. Simply put, in an empirical, measurable sense, the child's recovery wasn't worth the effort based on the ship's available parameters. After several more awkward minutes of waiting, and 3 more increasingly uncomfortable attempts to calm her, Representative Thex called for a squad of Senate medics to fetch her from his office. Quickly, a squad showed up with a normal complement of members. 1 Pauli, as the ship was primarily made of Pauli, 1 Thrux, as they were noted to be renowned xenobiologists, 1 Thruban, as their species had incredibly useful talent for being able to identify most toxins and chemical irritants to a molecular level based on taste, while they themselves were nearly invulnerable to most chemical irritants and poisons. And a human, for their talents in handling complex social interactions between the other races. The problem was, they didn't remove the broodkeeper from the room as expected, nor tranquilize her to quiet her keening, but rather began to speak to her. The representative, currently the highest ranking officer in the Senate on board, quickly lost patience and interrupted the team. "If you don't mind, would you please get on with it?" he demanded. The Pauli medic disengaged from the group and pulled him aside, while the rest of the squad continued to ignore him. "Pardon, sir, but my colleagues are simply fulfilling their duty. I know this is an inconvenience, sir, but it is vitally important that we follow established protocols when dealing with Annoyed, the Thex interrupted the medic. Yes, protocols, but I don't see why you need to keep her in here. For all of this nonsense, can't you take her? Well, at least take her into the corridor. And then we can't begin our meeting again until she leaves." The medic gave him an odd look, almost a sort of scowl, or look of disapproval. Thex assumed that it was a misunderstanding, as even the Pauli who joined the multi-species Senate organizations, such as the United Medical Corps or the Senate military, would not stray so far as to forget basic Pauli etiquette, but was shocked when her words proved that she was, indeed, scowling at him. "Pardon again, Representative, but our task is to protect those on the ship, and we are going to do so based on protocol that has been established. whether or not you are inconvenienced. Without so much as a bow, she turned back to the rest of the squad and began conferring once more. After another minute had passed, the human medic trotted over to the flustered Thex and explained, "Sorry, sir. I hate to be such an inconvenience, but we're going to have to call a halt, just for a minute. We need to keep the ship in orbit until we can check in with the Colonel, if you don't mind." Thex attempted to respond, but it was cut off quickly with a very sincere-sounding, very apologetic explanation of, "It's a real problem for you, and I know it's a pain, but rules don't give me a lot of leeway here, you know. I mean, you know how much I'd love to let you take us out, but with Zora's trouble here." He paused and pointed back at the broodkeeper that Thex now realized must be named Zora. "Well, rules dictate that we need to take this up with the highest-ranking member of the ship militarily. I know you're definitely gonna outrank him, sir. I know it, but, well, that's just the rules. Do you know what I mean, Representative?" She gave him a smile that was translated to him as charming, sincere, and apologetic. So he simply waved her on and began pacing again from side to side at the nose of the ship. The problem with the Senate, some species say, is that it was made up of so damned many species, each one demanding their own rules to be followed, each with their own understanding of morality and value. It's enough to drive a person crazy, which, incidentally, is how nearly the entire species of the Moragul died out, shortly after their entry into the Galactic Senate, some 1,500 solar cycles previously. To help avoid unnecessary conflict then, the Senate decided aeons ago that they would allow the united military and peacekeeping forces of the Senate to be taken by any interested ships for nothing more than a promise not to misuse the authority that the cadre of soldiers might give them. Similarly, when the Thrubans and their ability to identify nearly any dangerous chemical were introduced to the Senate, they agreed that the Thruban would go as well. This continued in a similar fashion over the course of several millennia, even as recently as when the humans arrived, newcomers to the Senate, and relatively minor as a species, not particularly wise, intelligent, strong, or advanced relative to most other races. They were only introduced as a requisite ship's company when it was realized that their species seemed to have a uniquely good talent for diplomacy, or bonding, attributed to most function of their own social development as primates, and at least partly as a function of other unique ability to easily understand the body language of other species, a function of the domestication of many of Earth's animals during their societal development. This meant that every ship should have at least a fairly large squad of Senate soldiers available, a medical team, an emergency response team, and a diplomatic squad of their own species available for nothing more than being a species that was part of the Senate. It was, though often frustrating for captains whose jobs didn't require them to use any of these resources, a blessing for most people. The problem is, once a species joins the Senate, and especially if they show a particular talent, they have a tendency to make others in the Senate groups, whether militarily, medically, diplomatically, or otherwise associated, change. Thrubans made their teams more aware, teaching them to notice minor things that they otherwise might forget to even notice, like the smell in the air on board, or the specific addictive taste found in different chemicals. Althruians taught the rest of the Senate to appreciate how tightly social bonds can form, as their species' natural empathetic projections made individuals more keenly aware of emotions of their companions. Humans, then, made the rest of the companions more aware of human strange relativism, the idea that right and wrong might not be a calculable value, but are also dependent on context and setting. That was the problem that had arisen here with Representative Thex's decision. He and the computer on board agreed that the total man-hours lost searching for a single child were too great, with only a 30 to 35% chance of successfully finding the child even with the help of all the soldiers on board being deployed. A 947,141 credit expected cost, which would be billed to the Senate itself for its peacekeeping costs. The estimated several thousand man-hours of labor expected. It was simply not worth finding the child. It wasn't a judgment of kindness, gentleness, or goodness, whatever that might be. It was just the evaluation of a value that was the best to the ship, and its poor-line representative was trying to make. But the Senate soldiers included 13 races, of which a disproportionate 21% were human. With humans on every diplomatic and medical team too, that meant that there was a massively large proportion of humans influencing the social and moral ideologies found on the ship, and it had taken the human medic Jane Odell under 30 seconds to convince the rest of the medic squad to agree that they should ask the Senate soldier colonel, the highest ranking on board, to override the ship computer and Representative Thex's decision. And it took even less time to convince the colonel himself when they reached him, with the weeping broodkeeper Zora in tow. He was a human himself who had integrated well with the other species and had been given his rank more for his ability to command loyalty than his ability to command armies. Upon hearing a missing child, he literally stood up and pressed the override switch that would send the ship a command to allow the Senate soldier deployment below. Representative Thex could not believe what he was seeing as the ship drifted slowly over the same patch of ground that they had initially dropped the broodlings off at, using sensors and equipment designed for exploration and mining to simply search unspecified number of square miles for a single broodling. He was convinced there must have been some other unrelated emergency occurring when he saw the override sensor go off on his view screen, until the colonel came rushing in to explain that they were dropping the entire complement of soldiers down to begin a search and rescue. Worse still, the colonel called an order for all local ships in the quadrant that were available, using a distress signal that Thex had honestly believed was reserved only for danger to the Senate representative, such as himself, or higher. And 3 more ships came, with 1 entire platoon of soldiers, for 1 child. Thex had demanded explanations, but the colonel had politely brushed him off, explaining that the Senate had rules allowing him this authority in the event that public safety of those on board was threatened. Thex had even explained, trying his best not to lose his temper or be impolite, that the safety of those on board was not threatened, that it was safety of 1 broodling, who might already have perished. It was illogical and wasteful and an absolute embarrassment to commit this many resources to save a single infant broodling, especially one so foolish as to wander off and get lost. The colonel had then used language that Therix's translator was unable to exactly translate, but that seemed profoundly impolite, if he was understanding it correctly, and with that, they had set off. They were now on their 2nd Earth Day of waiting as the soldiers combed the forest below. Some of the more nimble and even forest-adapted species, such as the snake-like Thrix, had joined the humans on the ground directly. Even some non-military Poli on board, despite the impropriety, had joined the effort. And still, nothing. It was uncomfortable, guilty feeling that led Thex to realize he hoped that they did not find the child, if only to prove the colonel that this was truly a wasted effort. But somehow, after 46 hours they had found the child, covered in strange insect bites and badly in need of water and food. The broodling was found 11.4 miles away from their last known position, having wandered in fear as soon as they realized that they'd become lost. All told, 175,000 man-hours were used and nearly 4,000 searchers looking for nearly 2 Earth days. Thex's math showed that the child would not be likely to be able to work that many hours their entire life. Working by human years to make his point to the colonel, Thex explained that the child would need to work 24/7 for nearly 20 Earth years to make up for the amount of time that was lost in searching for it, or 88 human years worth of full-time employment. It was, calculably, a bad decision. It was, demonstrably, a waste of finite resources that would result in nothing but a broodling that appeared to have poor judgment, more opportunities to waste the time and energy of others. The colonel didn't care. Zora, the broodkeeper, didn't care. When the colonel handed the control back to Thex and disabled the Senate override on the ship, Thex couldn't stop himself from making one more comment, knowing full well that it would be seen as disrespectful and rude. "You know," he said, trying his hardest not to allow the venom of irritation into his tone, "I'm gonna need to report this to your commanding officer when we reach the Senate space again. They're gonna know that you decided to waste untold resources for no reason beyond the foolish and emotional petulance of a human simpering illogical form of morality." The colonel, who had been retreating after officially turning control back over with a salute, turned back to face the representative. The squad of medics at his side as they too had finished making their full report on the missing broodling's well-being. "I'm sorry," started the captain, showing the human tendency to approach even moments of hostility with at least a semblance of friendliness. "I don't believe I heard you correctly, sir. Would you do me the favor and repeat yourself?" Still annoyed, and now also rather irritated that the colonel was pretending to have misheard him to force him in repeating his rudeness, Thex crisply answered, "I said that I will be reporting this waste of resources to the rest of the Senate, including the fact that you diverted us not over logic, but as a result of your own illogical and overly emotional human ideals of morality. Quite the abuse of power, if you ask me." The colonel paused, and then turned to look at the other medics. He knew that they, at least, would agree with him. Human or not, they were medics, and that meant that they were keenly aware of the value of life, whether of their species or not, and whether it was logical to care or not. They looked back at him with stoic and perhaps slightly angry glances. He took this as support and strode back up to the representative Thex. "Report all you want, Representative. I'm confident my actions will hold up against scrutiny, regardless of whether you think my simpering morality was the cause of the actions or not." Thex refused to be intimidated and leered back. "Are you honestly trying to defend yourself? Claim that this was all justified? Now, after this much time's been wasted?" The colonel nodded coldly. The characteristic human smile and friendliness was gone. "Yes, Representative. I am claiming that this was justified." Thex scoffed and then made sure to repeat the gesture again when he saw that the colonel must not have seen it well enough for his auto-translator to translate the meaning of the gesture. "This is a waste of time and resources. This was costly for no real gain. What do you humans believe a single life is worth, Colonel, if you will expand this much on an unproven child?" The colonel glared for a moment before responding. "The life of a child, Representative. I don't know about you, but on my planet we don't have a damned number. But if we had to put a value to it, we would call it priceless." And with another stiff, grudging salute, he and the medical team strode towards the exit. Only the poor-eye medic, perhaps in an effort to show her fellowship with his alien companions, or perhaps in response to the shame he felt from what his own kind was saying, looked back at the Thex and made a gesture, which, while translated imperfectly, seemed to be saying, "Go feck yourself," using the human hand gesture. End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you do, please consider supporting the author, even by popping over and leaving a thumbs up or a nice comment, just to show your appreciation for the story. However, if you wish to support this channel, there are links down below which will help immensely. I will see you all in the next one, and until then, I hope that you have a fantastic day. Cheers.